Hi everyone, welcome to the next episode of the Bay Street Capital Holdings podcast titled How'd You Do It and Why Should I Care? This series aims to highlight women doing amazing work in various industries. So today we are so lucky to be joined by Allyson Johnson, who is an investor relations professional at Gateway Partners. Hi Allyson, lovely to meet you and thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Laila. It's great to be with you.
So let's start off with an introduction and also an answer to the question of how'd you do it and why should I care?
That sounds great. It's always good to start at the beginning. As I had mentioned to you just now, I've listened to the other episodes of How Should I Do It and Why Should I Care? I love the concept of this podcast. I'm a huge podcast fan. So it was really a thrill and a treat to be offered the chance to come on and speak to you myself. So thank you again. I'm also very impressed and intrigued by the other women that you've had on, and very honored to be kind of in that club. So thank you very much. So the abridged version of sort of my background, my story, is that I grew up in suburban New Jersey, and then I spent 10 out of the 14 years of my career working abroad in mostly Singapore, a little bit Dubai. I was always interested in traveling, but really the opportunity came up because my first job out of university was with a bank called Standard Chartered Bank, whose business is very focused on emerging markets, specifically Asia. So there was an opportunity after I worked for them in New York to move with them to Singapore, which I took advantage of, and then the rest has sort of just fallen out from that.
That is awesome. So I guess the big question is, what inspired you to join this industry? Was it something that you studied in college or an interest that you found through an internship?
It's a great question. And I'm always curious how people get to their careers. So for me, I actually never really expected to be in finance. I didn't really have a firm plan when I was in college, but I guess sort of broadly, my thought was that I would teach for a few years out of college and then go back to law school. And the very vague plan at that point was that I was interested in becoming a judge. None of that ended up happening. Instead, I got as far as student teaching my final year of university. But then, to your point, because I actually had the opportunity to intern for Standard Chartered Bank prior to finishing university, the team that I worked with there encouraged me to apply for a full-time role in New York, which I did. And I think the main reason that I was interested in any of this was maybe because I didn't really know anything about finance. It was a huge opportunity for me to learn. And again, kind of speaking to my interest in education and teaching and learning, that was really exciting to me, just kind of figuring out this big global relevant industry that I had no idea, didn't know anything about. I did not grow up in the type of family where we talked stocks at the table, or we, had the Wall Street Journal open and we're, rehashing the day's news. It was not anything that cerebral. So there was so much for me to learn. And I think it's one of the reasons why I'm still in the industry is because it's very dynamic, but also there's just you're constantly learning about, whether it's a portfolio company or a new structure or a deal or a new investor that you've just met, their kind of outlook. So I would say that learning element has really inspired me to join and I guess stay in the industry.
That's really great to hear. So you also mentioned that you didn't really know much about finance. So I'm just wondering, what were the best resources then that helped you within your career?
Yeah, so that's a great question and something I think about a lot. So, I mean, the first resource, and again, my role in investor relations is very much a people-oriented role. I'm a people person, and I learned so much from kind of talking things through with other humans. I mean, it's all well and good to read, to listen, to watch, whatever. But really, I feel like when I start to internalize something is because I have, talked it through with another person. So the people is like kind of the primary resource, I would say. The other thing is I do read constantly. I think a lot of people I know in finance are constantly reading because of the dynamism, because again, there's just, there's so much that you don't come in knowing. So I kind of book wise, I don't read a lot of nonfiction, which makes me probably an outlier. It's not something I'm super proud of, but I really love fiction. But maybe that's partly because I read a ton of news and research kind of for my day job. So I kind of try to get both of those sides, maybe both sides of the brain, both kind of areas covered through kind of more fast-moving news, and then obviously kind of novels. The other thing I would say in terms of resources, I think this would kind of count in that category, is, for better or for worse, the finance industry has a variety of credentials. I mean, a lot of people would obviously be familiar with an MBA, Master's in Business Administration, which a ton of people in finance have. Another option that I've pursued actually are, there's various exams that you can sit and take to, again, kind of deepen your own knowledge. And then obviously you have a credential next to your name to demonstrate your expertise. So I have sat and passed the Chartered Alternative Investment Analyst, the CAIA, and I have 2/3 of my Chartered Financial Analyst, the CFA exam. I was meant to take the 3rd level last year and got canceled because of COVID. So the nice thing about those, I mean, look, the tests themselves are kind of a grind. And I respect a lot of people, once they leave school, they're not looking for another test just for fun. But what I will say is they do actually impart a ton of relevant knowledge and a lot of background and kind of fundamentals that allow you to kind of frame whatever you're looking at. I mean, there's been some very tangible examples of when I've actually used things I've learned in, whether it's the CAIA or the CFA curriculum, to achieve something that has, that I've been asked to do in my job. So that actually has been quite gratifying, and it means it wasn't just kind of a waste of time.
No, that's great. And I think that, I know a little about these exams, but they're a great way to sort of get your foot in the door if you haven't studied finance formally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, to that point, I was a math major, again, thinking about the fact that I wasn't kind of laser focused on entering finance, and math, everyone said, oh, it must be a really relevant degree. Look, it's great because you can kind of learn how to think and learn how to problem solve. I would say if there was a single major that would really set you up well for a career in finance, it would probably be in Microsoft Excel.
Yes.
A minor in PowerPoint. So which is all just to say, I think for anyone out there, and I'm maybe jumping ahead, but for anyone out there who's thinking of a career in finance and those building blocks, you can actually study anything. Like, pick something that you're really passionate about and interested in, where you will be able to excel and kind of differentiate yourself, and demonstrating that expertise, I think, will go farther than just kind of like shoving yourself through, a major in business or finance or whatever you think that they're looking for. That's what I would say about the kind of the school part, I guess.
No, that's really important and really great advice for anybody, thinking about going to college or like sort of doubting their choice of major. I think that finance, it does accept a lot of different majors, and it's just sort of that interest that you can easily show through, reading the Wall Street Journal every day or just knowing what's going on in the markets.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, and again, like I've said 100 times now, it's so dynamic that as much as, the CFA curriculum, for example, it doesn't completely get overhauled every year, but they evolve it, they tweak it year after year. And I think that it's not just so you can't use your same materials from the year before. It's also because it is really fast moving, and what's relevant this year. I mean, okay, crypto, I don't know if it's a good example or not, but like 10 years ago, it certainly wasn't very mainstream. It existed, but it wasn't mainstream. So just kind of what is relevant? What are people talking about and thinking about? That obviously evolves very quickly.
No, thank you for that advice. And I guess following on from that, you probably spoke to a lot of people, read a lot of books before entering the finance industry, but are there any lessons that you wish you would have learned? Anything that slipped through the cracks that you wish, dang, I wish I knew that.
So many lessons. The nice thing is I think it's never too late to keep learning those lessons. I would say there's a lot of lessons that, again, I've learned maybe the hard way, maybe just through advice. And some days it's easier to implement those lessons than others. I think that's kind of the trick. You can know that something is the way you're meant to do it, but the execution might be the tricky part. So I guess one thing that I have reflected on is, you get out what you put in. This is, look, I think we can debate how meritocratic any industry is. And certainly, there are roles within finance that I think are very meritocratic, because, if you think about a portfolio manager, especially a public markets portfolio manager, like you get a report card at the end of every trading day. And that's quite easily quantified. Again, is the full picture? Maybe not. But I would say, remembering that you can, like, there's always more to be done. Not to say, like, please never sleep, but you do get out what you put in. I think working hard is something that it was very straightforward and tangible for me in college and in school. And I think it becomes a little bit less tangible when you move into the workforce, and it becomes much more kind of self-directed. So again, it's, which is great because you can kind of choose when to dial it up and dial it down. But I do think, you see a lot of the people that I know who've been very successful. Sure, yes, they're really smart people to begin with, but they put in the time, they put in the hours, they put in, not only today, but like when they were starting out. So that's one thing. And again, like it's a lesson that I've learned. I know it. And I think, but every day it's kind of when you have to remind yourself of.
Yeah. And I think it's very applicable to any job in any industry because, jobs, as you mentioned, lots of different jobs are meritocratic on different levels. But again, at the end of the day, it is how much you put in.
Totally. Yeah, no, I definitely don't think that is something that's unique to finance. And I remember, it's definitely something that people told me when I was going to college. You get out what you put in. You may not be invited and asked to do things the same way you were in the period before in your life, whether it was high school or college or your MBA or whatever. And so I think taking that ownership and being proactive is really, it becomes so much more about that, I guess.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then thinking about the whole span of your career, what would you say is your biggest mistake and what did you learn from it?
So I have made so many mistakes. I make mistakes every day. And, I guess what I would say is there's a category of mistakes where, it was inevitable that you were going to make a set of mistakes. And again, that's good. Sometimes you need to kind of learn things by getting it wrong and by doing. And I think you want to try to, again, like learn the lessons, learn from those mistakes, to avoid repeating the same mistakes. And again, there's like good mistakes to make, kind of the safe spaces to make those mistakes. And then there's like, no, this is like really important that everything needs to be perfect. And you can kind of spend your time accordingly on those two sets. So I guess one mistake that I've made, like just very tangibly, and again, there's a million to choose from just this week alone. But one thing I think back on, so in my role, the primary goal, or not always with investor relations, but my role is kind of a hybrid of investor relations and fundraising, marketing, for the fund that I work for. And I did a similar role at another fund immediately prior to Gateway in Singapore. And so with that fund, we were in discussions with a prospective investor. We were pretty far along. And I was feeling really excited and really good about that. And ultimately, they just declined to invest. And one of the pieces of feedback, there's never one reason I think that people decline, but one of the reasons that they gave was that they wished they had been able to speak to two of my colleagues, two of the investment analysts, and just thought, why didn't you ask? Like, of course we could arrange that. And I think, the lesson there is, and again, it's something I learn just every single day. You really have to be very proactive. I think investors have so much on their plates, and if they're hearing from me, they're hearing from 1,000 other fund managers out there. It's a very crowded space. So, just kind of trying to spoon feed and not spoon feed, because that makes it sound like they, need the help, but being like thinking a couple of steps ahead, anticipating, and also sort of trying to set them up for success as they're having those conversations internally. Like, it's one thing to kind of get your point person on board and bought in. They're not, in most cases, they're not the entire decision-making team. So I think look, it was a painful lesson, painful way to learn. But it was good because, again, it's applicable not just for an easy one like a conversation with a colleague, but okay, this is how they're looking at performance. Maybe they also want to see these other things, and again, you just have to kind of keep on that front foot, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, actually, and I'm glad you learned from that mistake, and it was a learning point.
Well, the good news is I actually so again, that was at my prior fund, my prior company, but I had recently exchanged an email with that particular investor in the last couple of months. So the thing is, again, and look, the great thing in this industry is usually, there are certain things that are probably personal, but that type of decision is not personal. That we still have a great relationship. I think if I were visiting where he is, I think he'd take a meeting with me and we could have coffee, whatever. So that part is kind of good.
Yeah, that actually brings up an interesting point, that finance is so much more than just crunching the numbers. It's such a people-oriented job, and no matter what area, what division of finance you're in, at the end of the day, it's about forging those really important relationships.
That's, again, you can't, I think fundraising is different than just building relationships, but I 100% think so much of it is about relationships. Which again is great because it's something that you can keep working on and keep building. It's also something that needs a lot of nourishing. I think it's fine. There's some people that you have that relationship, and then if you lose touch for a year or so, no problem, you can pick up where you left off, but you need to put in kind of that time in order to get to that point. But yeah, it's for being so quantitative, for being so kind of numbers oriented, and we all love the numbers. I would say the relationships are so important. And so it really, look, I think it's one reason, a trend that we've seen, the industry has seen in the last, call it 15 months since COVID started, is that investors, asset owners, asset allocators have been focusing more on their existing funds, their existing managers, because there's a relationship, because they know them, because they know sort of what to expect. And I think and again, there's not just one reason for that, but I think it's a good example of how much meeting someone in person really matters. Like, you can do all the due diligence, you can do all the homework, you can crunch all the numbers and go through all the materials, but seeing someone is a really important part of the equation.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess we've sort of touched on this a little, but what is one myth about the finance industry that you would like to debunk?
Maybe that we all make boatloads of money, and it's super cutthroat, and again, that we're all just kind of crunching numbers all day. I think I mean, look, for anyone, for a lot of people in the finance industry, I think the relationship orientation is pretty apparent. But I don't know. I think maybe if you're outside looking in, maybe that's less true. And look, there are definitely, it's an industry where the compensation is very good, and you know, that's, you can justify it, you cannot justify it, but I think there's a big difference between you know, Ray Dalio at Bridgewater and the bank teller down the block, and everyone in between, you know. So yeah, I don't know. I think the cutthroat thing is, again, like there's an element of truth. It's like any stereotype, is like any, I don't know, any myth, but there is a grain of truth for sure. But it's definitely not the full picture.
Very interesting, and interesting food for thought, I guess, for those who are starting out in the finance industry.
Yes. I mean, look, I was just gonna say, I think it is, I mean, maybe not cutthroat. It's definitely, there are roles within finance that are less competitive, but there are plenty, like if you're a very competitive person, whether or not that's like fully cutthroat, I think there's a lot of different opportunities where it can be very exciting for those super competitive people.
For sure. And I'm sure you're very busy at the moment, but what have you listened to or read recently that's really inspired you?
So again, like I mentioned, I'm a voracious reader and I'm a gigantic podcast fan. So I would give you one podcast recommendation. So I've recently, a recent discovery, because I have a long list of dailies, of monthlies, of weeklies. One that has recently come up, I think it comes out a couple of times a week, is a Bloomberg podcast called Odd Lots. And again, it's probably mostly geared towards a finance audience, but finance, economics, industry, I think there's probably, and even if you're just kind of an inquisitive person, I think it offers a lot. It's hosted by two journalists named Tracy Alloway and Joe Weisenthal. They have on really interesting guests, and what I've noticed in particular is that their questions are really insightful. They're really interesting, and it implies that they know a lot about, like, they've done their homework. They're really deep in the weeds. Again, they're journalists. So that's been one that I've had a lot of fun with. And again, it's recently they've talked about things that really are not very applicable to my day job. You know, they've been talking about decentralized finance. They've been talking about the spike in the lumber markets a couple weeks ago. They were talking about, they had an economist from the White House on a couple weeks ago, talking about some of the Biden administration's plans and implications on sort of you know, the fiscal policy side of the equation. So anyway, so it's really interesting. Again, like an episode on decentralized finance, I probably understand 40%, maybe at best, and I would not be able to kind of explain it to anyone. But again, you kind of, it's stuff that is interesting, and whatever. I think, you know, probably not a flash in the pan, something that we need to kind of, you know, keep an eye out and keep stretching our muscles that way. Anyway, so that's a podcast that I really like. Then in terms of what I've been reading, so I actually did read some nonfiction recently, which I'm proud to say, and I'm so glad, because it was really an incredible book. And I don't know if you read it, but I'm sure you will have heard of it. It's a book called Cast by Isabel Wilkerson. And it's so brilliantly written. I mean, she, for a while, I believe, was a New York Times journalist. So again, just beautiful writing. And the book is basically about how she draws parallels between the caste system in India, Nazi Germany, and the, you know, discrimination, to put it mildly, that happened there, and then the racial inequality in America, and the history of racism and slavery in America. And I think drawing it's really insightful. It's really well done. She brings in personal anecdotes. It was just really, really again, I learned a lot, and it's very outside of, sort of what I'd be reading for work, kind of other nonfiction. And then the fiction recommendation I have for you is I'll give you an author, because I have read 3 of his novels, and I'm just like, I can't believe he wasn't part of the curriculum when I was in school. I mean, anyway, he's a beautiful writer, like just incredible prose, incredible stories, character development, the whole thing. Anyway, so it's Colson Whitehead. So I don't know if you've read The Underground Railroad. That came out relatively recently.
Mm-hmm.
And then the older ones, I think The Intuitionist is one of his, I want to say one of his earlier novels. I think that's probably like 15 plus years old. And the other one I read was The Nickel Boys. And they're not the type of novel, the type of fiction I like is not super lighthearted. I mean, there's not necessarily beach read page turners,
Yeah.
but again, just really, really well written, great, great food for thought, I guess. So those are my various recommendations.
No, thank you for the recommendations. I'll definitely make sure to check them out. And then my next question is, who are 3 people in your life who have been the most influential to you?
This is hard. I mean, I'll pick people who are among the people I've known the longest, but I think, the great thing about my job, and maybe a little bit less so during COVID, but especially without COVID, because I get to meet a lot of people, like you pick up just little things along the way, and maybe it's not like fully influence, I don't know where you draw the line there, but again, that ability to just learn and kind of pick up the best bits from everyone is if I'm able to do even a little bit of that, I think it would be a good use of sort of my time in my career. But no, I mean, look, my parents definitely, especially my mom, we're super close. We're very similar. And look, I think, I'm not alone in saying, my parents are really where I got some of my core values. And, they've just been so supportive of me moving across the world, in everything I've done. They've been there for me. My boyfriend, and when I was thinking about this, and again, like, okay, fine, everyone's influenced maybe by their partner and this and that, but specifically he, I grew up and I'm the oldest of 3 kids. I was very type A. I still am type A, let's be honest. But I think Mitt has definitely taught me that you don't need to plan everything so far in advance. You don't need to, it's okay to be spontaneous. It's fun to be spontaneous.
It is fun to be spontaneous, yes.
I mean, and again, like there's certain things where I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be spontaneous with that particular thing. Or again, you pick your moments, but that's been really good just to kind of, help me loosen up maybe. And I guess so those are kind of 3 people, but let's call that 2. The third, I would again do a 2 for 1. My 2 best friends from college. They're the people where I can just be my goofiest, my most vulnerable, my braggiest. If I've had a really great day, or if I had a really great call, or whatever it was. Maybe they're rolling their eyes on the other end of the text, or fine. But again, we've known each other at this point, I mean, for a long time, over 15 years. And they just always have your back. And we live on opposite coasts now. One of them has a couple kids, the other one's pregnant. Our lives are different. And even when I was in Asia, this is on the other side of the world, but I'm very grateful that they have kind of stuck with me through, since college, because they've been so influential. But I think kind of in maybe smaller ways. Again, they're maybe a little bit type A too, so they're maybe pushing me the other direction from Knit. But
that's so nice.
It's a combination.
You're surrounded by such amazing people.
Yeah.
And then finally, to wrap up our conversation, is there any advice that you wish you gave yourself at any point in your life?
Relax. Slow down. Slow down is probably a good one. I again, like there are some days when I execute that advice really well, and there's some days when I just have completely lost track of it. But I also think and again, I'm very much of two minds about this one, but sort of the advice of kind of talking to yourself as you would a good friend.
Yes, that's very important. And we often forget to do that. We're so hard on ourselves.
I'm really bad at it. And look, maybe I'm not the easiest going as a friend. You know, I do subscribe a little bit to the philosophy of some tough love and kind of, you know, devil's advocate, and all of that's fine. I definitely give, you know, I know when to give people the benefit of the doubt and give people a break. And I think, which is all true, except when it comes to myself. You know, I can have a really productive day and still sit back at 10:30 p.m. and be like, oh, you know, what did I even do today? And I didn't get X, Y, and Z done. I didn't even start this other thing. You know, at the same time, I think having that sort of internal, like, you know, I don't know if it's Jiminy Cricket or something internal to basically keep you going. Look, I think it's been helpful through this past year when there's been a periods where it's been really slow and like hard to kind of, not hard to physically get out of bed. And believe me, this has been a relatively easy pandemic for me. I'm very, very lucky. But yeah, I think there's a plus side to being kind of a little bit harder on yourself, but again, kind of balancing that out with, like, you know, keeping things in perspective. It's a marathon, not a sprint. You know, it's okay. You'll wake up and you can do more work tomorrow. It's not going away. So I guess that's the advice I would give myself.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today, Allyson. It was lovely to hear your story and hear your insight about the finance industry as well.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. And I can't wait to listen to all of the forthcoming episodes of your podcast. It's such a great project.
Great. Thank you so much.